here's another example of, or in fact, another notion of fairness that actually had been defined even earlier in 2012 by a former colleague of mine at Microsoft Research, Cynthia Dwork, and her colleagues. In this notion of fairness, the idea was treat similar individuals similarly. So, for instance, if you have two individuals and you look at their features and you can sort of say they're kind of similar, then any action you do on either of those individuals should be the same. So for instance, if I have a man and a woman, then they look pretty similar in terms of their qualifications, then I should offer each of them a job because they are similar. That would be the similar treatment. Well, it turns out that, so this has been also studied as a formal definition of fairness, and it has its other strong ramifications as well. I won't go into that. As another example of fairness or unfairness, some colleagues of mine at Carnegie Mellon had done a study on Google, using Google, I should say, not on Google, using Google, which resulted in a New York Times headline that basically said, higher paying jobs were shown more to men than to women. This also caused a lot of excitement in the community because in this particular case, it was not actually clear who to blame. And that leads me to my the next letter in the acronym, accountability. So, okay, so now we see that maybe some discriminatory behavior has been exhibited, or there's some unfairness in some way. What should we do about it? First, let's figure out, well, who or what is to blame? Well, even in this example of higher paying jobs shown more to men than to women, it's not clear. Like, do you blame the advertiser who is targeting the ad? Do you blame Google that actually explicitly programmed the system to show the ad less often to females? Do you, is it the community? Males and females actually respond differently to ads. Maybe there's competition for advertisers to females that suggested that that a certain ad would be much more interesting to females than to men. Some third party. Maybe there was a hacker. I mean, who knows who's to blame? Because Google, in some sense, is a very big black box. So that's the question of accountability. Who's to blame? Or what's to blame? Because it might be a bot. It might be a program. I wanted to say that it's not like this is a hopeless cause. Some colleagues of mine, again at Carnegie Mellon and Microsoft Research, and I had been working on a different problem that gave us some hope that there was some semi, if not automatic way to determine accountability in a narrow context. And the question is, if you are responsible, so for instance, you are the company and you publish a privacy policy and you realize that there's a violation to the privacy policy you've published, well then you are clearly responsible for fixing that violation. And this was something that I'm speaking now specifically about some work that we did at Microsoft, and that is we showed that you can actually automatically do a check of the officially published privacy policy of a large corporation to detect violations. So typical privacy policies, and now I think many more of you are reading these as opposed to clicking through them, but typical ones are, screens full of English language text that says we'll store some data separate from other data, we'll delete some other data after a certain number of days. All these privacy policy statements that many of us probably never read. Well, they're in the terms of agreement in any service or product we buy. So we built a tool that uses pretty off-the-shelf programming language techniques, static analysis techniques, to basically run through an entire code base to find violations of such privacy policy. We had to invent a formal language so that we can codify the policy. This tool is run, and these are 2014 numbers. These are Microsoft numbers. It's run every night. And this is the kind of tool, you can see the millions of lines of code, the number of changes that happen every day. It's one of the things, these sorts of things you cannot do manually. But thanks to computer science techniques and a lot of engineering, good engineering, it is a kind of tool that scales and can be run fairly quickly. So this only takes about 30 minutes every day to run over the entire, in this case, it was the Bing code base. And you can now imagine, for those of you who are familiar with EU GDPR, that this is the kind of tool that is it would be very useful to have for running internally for any company to ensure that the EU GDPR privacy policies are going to be complied with.